Now, as you've probably already heard, starting this fall on Disney XD, we'll be getting a new Star Wars animated show called Resistance, brought to us of course by executive producer Dave Filoni. And though details are few right now, we do know this new show will take place in the time period shortly before the events of The Force Awakens, and feature a pilot named Kazuda Izayano, who is recruited into the early Resistance by General Leia Organa to spy on the growing threat of the First Order. We also know that Kazuda will be a part of an elite unit of ace pilots, which the show will center around, but there will also be appearances by other well-known characters such as Poe Dameron and Captain Phasma, both of which will be voiced by the original actors Oscar Isaac and Gwendolyn Christie, of course. And my very first reaction to this news was that the premise sounds a little bit like Rebels, which that's not necessarily a bad thing, mind you. It's just that we're getting another show that's set right before the start of a trilogy, which focuses on a group of characters that are part of a burgeoning military operation and have to run missions against a greater threat, though in the case of this new show, the extent of that threat is probably not going to be fully known. I also thought to myself that this sounds a little bit like what the Poe Dameron comic book has been, which is of course canon, because it's more or less about Black Squadron, an elite group of resistance pilots, and is set in the time period right before the events of The Force Awakens. And don't get me wrong here, I am excited for this show. I'm excited for anything that Dave Filoni gives us after the incredible work he's done on the Clone Wars and Rebels. They could have announced that the next show was called Star Wars Hoth and be about a Tauntaun named Ralph that just has to go about his day-to-day life trying not to be eaten by wampas, and I'd be on board because Dave Filoni was involved. So I have little doubt that this show is going to be great, and it does open the door for a lot of other possibilities. Things like learning more about who and what Snoke is, how he came to power, and how the First Order truly came to be. In The Force Awakens, Leia seems to know that Snoke was the one that corrupted her son, so perhaps in this show we'll learn how she figured that out. Keep in mind in the book Bloodline, which of course is canon, Leia essentially creates the Resistance at the end of the book, and at this time, which is 6 years before the events of The Force Awakens, Ben is still training with Luke. Which means, depending on just when exactly this show will start in the timeline, and I'd imagine it may pick up shortly after the events of Bloodline, which of course is the creation of the Resistance again, there's a chance we'll get to see Luke and Ben and learn more about what happened between them. After all, in Bloodline, the truth about Leia and Luke being the children of Darth Vader comes out, which essentially ruins Leia's political career, and then she chooses to go and form the Resistance to fight the First Order, which no one else seems to care about. And she is then forced to send a message to her son Ben telling him why she kept it a secret from him, why she didn't tell him that Darth Vader was his grandfather. So it'd be interesting if this show somehow dealt with how Ben reacted to that news. Do I think that's likely? No, but one way or the other, and granted it will not be the focus of the show, I'd be surprised if we don't get some more context around Ben's turn to the dark side and how Luke ultimately failed, especially because I'm imagining Leia will be a main character in this show. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we also learn more about what went wrong between her and Han, since again in Bloodline, the two are still together. Though, of course, as it should be, the new characters will be the focus of the show, and I'm very much excited to see them and learn more about them. However, in Rebels, they did a great job of focusing on the Phoenix crew while still, from time to time, branching out and concluding storylines from elsewhere, like the final fate of Maul and bringing back Ahsoka, as well as doing things that tied to the other sources of canon, like bringing in characters such as Saw Gerrera, Mon Mothma, Wedge, and so on, characters from the movies, and I'd be surprised if this trend doesn't continue now in Resistance. This trend of trying to tie multiple sources of canon together. The big question this now leaves us with, however, is what about the way Rebels ended? When are we going to learn more about Ahsoka and Sabine's quest to find the missing Ezra? Now, in a dream scenario, we'd get a standalone animated movie about this. Not a theatrical release, mind you, but something that aired on the Disney Channel or wherever, and then went straight to Blu-ray. Do I think that'll happen? No, but after announcing the end of Rebels, Filoni did say that they had animated projects in the works, implying maybe there was more than one thing brewing. Again, I don't think something like that's likely, and there's every chance that the fate of Ezra and the next chapter in Ahsoka's life are things that are going to be left on the back burner for a while, and something they'll come back to a ways down the road. Maybe even in the later seasons of Resistance, who knows? I mean, Filoni did take unanswered questions from the Clone Wars and eventually answered them in Rebels, so something like that happening again wouldn't surprise me in the least. After all, in a sense, the animated shows have been like a running story with a few common threads between them, and I'd be surprised if this wasn't a trend that continued. All in all though, I'm excited for Resistance. I'm excited for what it could be. I honestly think what I'm most nervous about is the animation style, and I don't know if the one image we got of the show put my mind at ease at all. The Clone Wars, especially in the later seasons, looked incredible. Granted, a lot of money was spent to make it look that way, but it still set the initial bar extremely high in terms of what a Star Wars animated show could look like. Rebels clearly didn't spend the kind of money that the Clone Wars did, but what it did do was draw heavily on the art of Ralph McQuarrie, which was not only appreciated, but also gave the show that original trilogy look and feel, which makes sense since the show did lead up to said trilogy. In other words, Rebels may not have looked as fantastic as the Clone Wars did, but it always looked like Star Wars, so now I'm very curious to see what the look, feel, and animation quality of Resistance will be, which they have said will be anime inspired. Then again, it really doesn't matter how good or bad it looks if the stories aren't great and the characters aren't intriguing, so I'm just going to reserve any type of judgment on the show, even once images and clips start to come out, till I actually see the show. I remember before Rebels came out that they released a series of shorts introducing each character, and I was less than impressed on all fronts by them. But here I am now, several years later, praising it as a terrific Star Wars show, and eagerly awaiting this fall to see what they have in store for us next. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me your hopes and fears and theories for this new animated show, so leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.